I am Rachel Donovan, and I will never forget the weight of that morning. My husband Daniel didn't even look at me when he said the words. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Security will walk you out. Beside him, Alyssa, his new chief operating officer, and the woman he'd once called just a promising hire, rested her hand on his shoulder, like she already owned everything I had built. 8 years of code contracts and sleepless nights signed away with a smirk and a manila folder. But this isn't the end. This is the beginning of my fight back. If you want to see exactly how I plan to take back everything they stole, please like and subscribe to the channel because you won't want to miss a single step of the plan. And let me know where you're watching from. The boardroom was silent. I could hear the faint hum of the air vents, the soft click of someone's pen, the rain tapping the glass behind me. No one defended me. Not one of the men and women I'd led for almost a decade met my eyes. I knew why. They'd heard the whispers how I'd become erratic, unstable, too emotional to lead. Daniel's rumor campaign had done its work long before this meeting began. He slid the envelope across the table, his wedding ring glinting beneath the cold fluorescent lights. "We appreciate your contributions, Rachel," he said, voice smooth, rehearsed. "But the company's direction has changed. The company, as if it hadn't been mine too." I didn't speak. I simply reached for the old laptop sitting on the credenza, a relic from our first days. Its corners dented the sticker half peeled from the lid. Daniel's lips curved in a faint dismissive smile. "You can keep that," he said. "A souvenir from our startup days." Souvenir. That word almost made me laugh. He thought it was a relic, but that laptop held something he could never imagine. As I stood, my phone vibrated softly in my pocket. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. I knew the message by heart 48 hours ago. That was how long it would take before the system I had quietly built within Nexatech, the one Daniel had stolen and branded as his own, would begin to reveal the truth. Not destroy, not sabotage, but reveal. I turned to him one last time. "You'll want to keep an eye on the servers today," I said, keeping my tone even. He frowned. "What does that mean?" "Just a friendly reminder," I replied. "Sometimes what you bury has a way of digging itself back up." Alyssa's pen froze above her notepad. Daniel's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, I stepped away. The two security guards waiting near the door fell into step behind me, unsure if I was a threat or just another casualty. The hallway outside was sterile and bright, the kind of place where ambition smelled like disinfectant. My heels echoed across the tile. I'd walked this corridor 1,000 times, late nights, early mornings, caffeine buzzing through my veins as I built what I thought was our future. Now I was walking out of it for the last time. In the elevator, the silence pressed close. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked calm, almost detached, though I could feel my heart hammering beneath my ribs. Not from fear, from focus. When the doors opened, the lobby was quiet. The receptionist looked up, startled, her smile faltering as she took in the two guards behind me. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me my coat. "Good luck, Rachel," she whispered. I nodded. "Luck's overrated." Outside, the Seattle sky hung low and gray rain misting the pavement. I walked across the plaza slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. Every step felt deliberate, anchored. At the edge of the parking lot, I stopped beneath the overhang and glanced back at the building, the glass tower Daniel and I had dreamed of owning someday. Now it was his kingdom alone. For the moment. I unlocked my car, slid the laptop onto the passenger seat, and sat there in silence. The rain drummed lightly on the windshield, steady and rhythmic. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. System synchronization complete. All data checkpoints aligned. Integrity check scheduled 09:10 a.m. I smiled to myself. The code was doing exactly what it was meant to do, quietly, invisibly, gathering every log Daniel had tampered with, every audit he'd falsified, every file Alyssa had renamed. It wouldn't crash anything. It would simply unmask everything. Transparency can be more devastating than chaos. I took a slow breath, steadying the tremor in my hands. There was no turning back now, not that I wanted to. For months, I'd played the part Daniel wrote for me, the distracted CTO, the fragile wife, the woman losing her edge. It had been exhausting. But beneath that facade, I'd been rewriting the rules one encrypted function at a time. Now all that patience was about to pay off. I started the car and drove without a destination, letting the streets blur past. The city looked softer through the rain, like a place half asleep. My reflection in the window followed me everywhere, composed but hollow-eyed. At a red light, I caught myself whispering under my breath, "It's almost over." A delivery truck splashed past, spraying water over the curb, snapping me out of the thought. No, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I parked near the waterfront, the gray expanse of Puget Sound stretching out before me. From here, I could see Nexatech's building in the distance, a glass obelisk glinting faintly against the storm. Somewhere inside those walls, Daniel was congratulating himself. Alyssa was probably composing a press statement, and the system was beginning to stir. The irony wasn't lost on me. A company built to prevent breaches was about to face one of conscience. I opened the laptop on my passenger seat. The startup sound was soft, familiar, a heartbeat I'd coded myself years ago. On the screen, lines of text began to scroll. The system check had initiated. In bold red letters, the first line appeared: unauthorized, modification detected, root trace, D. Marshall, A. Cole. I exhaled slowly. There it was, the truth surfacing. Each flag, each log entry, each timestamp was a confession their own system couldn't deny. It wasn't destruction. It was accountability. The raindrops on the windshield refracted the city lights into fractured colors, red, white, and gold. I watched them shimmer and fade one by one. For the first time in months, my pulse slowed. The world would see everything soon enough. The lies, the manipulation, the rewritten history. And when it did, no one would ask if I was crazy, unstable, or paranoid. They'd ask how he thought he could erase me in the first place. By 9:10 a.m., the code would finish syncing with every global node Nexatech owned. By noon, the logs would leak into the audit database accessible to their investors. By tomorrow, journalists would start asking questions. I didn't need to say a word. The truth, once written in code, doesn't need a voice. I closed the laptop gently, the hum of the system fading into silence. Outside, the rain lightened into mist, soft against the windshield. And I sat there, still breathing, letting the weight of the moment settle around me. Everything Daniel had built on deceit was already shifting beneath him. He just didn't know it yet. The beginning wasn't heroic. It was cramped and unflattering and smelled faintly of burnt coffee. Our one bedroom on Capitol Hill learned to be an office because there was nowhere else for ambition to go. The kitchen counter was a command center. The couch a meeting room, the floor a filing cabinet that never closed properly. Pizza boxes became footrests. I wrote variable names on the back of grocery receipts and taped them to the wall like constellations only I could read. Daniel paced in socks, rehearsing lines to people who weren't here yet. He tried out phrases like predictive defense and anticipatory modeling, then asked if they sounded too grand. I shrugged over the blue glow of my editor and told him to keep the words. I would make them true. At 3 in the morning, we would argue quietly about whether trust could be designed, and by 4, I would be knee-deep in a proof of concept that said yes, if you listen to the smallest anomalies long enough, they tell you where the storm will be. We didn't have money for whiteboards, so we wrote on the window with a washable marker and hoped the neighbors thought it was art. We learned the rhythm of release nights, how to live between compile and crash, how to sleep upright for 15 minutes without losing the thread. I cooked noodles in a dented pot and ate them with a fork over my laptop, while Daniel sketched diagrams on a paper plate, tracing arrows through grease stains like highways on a map. He believed he could sell the future. I believed I could build it. When faith splits like that and meets in the middle, it feels like flight. The day we named it, rain held the city hostage, and the little lamp on our counter made a low halo on the stacks of paper. I wrote Nexatech at the top of a document, and waited for the word to feel like a place I could live. Daniel said it out loud twice, tried it with optimism, and then with gravity, and we decided it worked both ways. He sent the first version to a Gmail account we had made, just for the company, and grinned like we had opened a door with a key no one else knew existed. Our wedding came later, not because we didn't love each other, but because paperwork can only happen in daylight. A Tuesday morning, a clerk who had run out of smiles by 9, a dress that arrived wrinkled and stayed that way. Daniel wore the same suit he had worn to a pitch that had gone nowhere. It looked braver under the courthouse lights. We signed the registry. He placed his hand over mine, and he whispered one sentence I locked in a safe place. 50-50 forever. We walked out into a drizzle, and on the way home we stopped for a cake with canned frosting and a candle that burned down faster than we could find a match. It was the best day, because it didn't ask to be more than it was. The prototype barely stood on its own legs. It wobbled and lied and forgot what it had promised. But then one night it caught a pattern, nothing dramatic, just a tremble in the traffic like someone breathing where they shouldn't. I printed the logs and watched the ink as if it could confirm my heartbeat. Daniel leaned over my shoulder quiet for a long time, then kissed the top of my head. We didn't sleep that night. We taught the model how to trust itself, how to tell flicker from fire. In those months, success didn't feel like money. It felt like the dev machine was booting on the first try. It felt like a bug dissolving at 2:37 in the morning because you finally asked it the right question. It felt like the neighbor's dog barking at sunrise and realizing you'd built enough of a future to deserve breakfast. The first investors came from a coffee shop where the espresso machine drowned out our fear. Daniel did the talking the way he always did, gestures, contained voice pitched to a confidence I hadn't learned yet. I opened the laptop and showed a page of graphs that behaved a series of alerts that knew when to shut up. They nodded, they asked for risk for edges and cliffs, and we gave them fences and parachutes and a view. The checks were not large, but I cried in the bathroom anyway, because someone had put numbers next to our names and the world suddenly had weight. We rented a brick corner in a warehouse that used to make something important and had forgotten how. Exposed pipes. A heater that rattled awake like an old smoker. Windows taller than our hopes, but dirtier too. We dragged up mismatched desks, we bought chairs that swiveled in unpredictable ways, and we hired 3 people who could have made more money elsewhere, but wanted to be first. When the elevator got stuck for 40 minutes on a Monday morning, we held a stand-up in the narrow light and promised not to call it a sign. The first client could have crushed us without looking down. A financial services firm that used words like posture and appetite when they meant risk. I demoed the anomaly engine on a connection that I think we kept alive through shared will. It hummed when it should have hummed and barked when the simulated intrusions reached too close to the bone. When they signed, Daniel put his head on the table and laughed without sound. I put my hand on the back of his neck and felt everything we had been holding back return to us in one long breath. We celebrated with takeout that came in cartons that leaned into each other like tired friends. We drank cheap sparkling wine from mugs because the office had cups, but not that kind of cup. Someone taped the cork to the steel beam above my desk, and over the next year 3 more joined it. A constellation of small victories pointing to the place where it had all started. Roles formed without being named. Daniel could walk into a room of strangers and leave with a promise. I could walk into a problem and leave with a shape that could be coded. He learned the cadence of quarterly decks. I learned the patient cruelty of unit tests. When a client asked a question that sounded like fear, he answered first. When they asked a question that sounded like math, I did. In the evenings, we compared notes and pretended the difference between those 2 questions wasn't already teaching us something we didn't want to know. We hired more people. We found the right ones slowly, the wrong ones quickly. We built a culture out of candor and late-night playlists and an inbox rule that changed the subject line to a joke if a thread exceeded 12 replies. We wrote a handbook that promised we would not be the kind of company that burned people into brilliance. When someone stayed past midnight, It had to be because they had fallen in love with a problem, not because a manager had mistaken urgency for leadership. There were small frictions even then. A pitch where Daniel translated my answers into softer syllables, and I felt the floor tilt a degree. A meeting where an investor asked me to describe our back-end magic, and then turned to Daniel for the big picture, as if mine lived in a smaller frame. Moments you file under. It's fine, because the next morning brings a new build, and there is no time to be precious when you are out of time already. But for every quiet ache, there were a dozen moments of grace. A junior engineer caught a bug I had missed and blushed when I thanked him in front of everyone. A Slack channel that erupted in emojis when the dashboard finally stabilized at 4 nines. A Friday afternoon when we closed the laptops at 5 and nobody opened them again until Monday because we said so and meant it. It matters the first time you tell your company you are allowed to be a person. We moved again to an office with glass that made the city feel like a colleague. The desks aligned as if we had planned aesthetics when mostly we had planned survival. We painted one wall the color of a bruise and called it modern, and I installed a built-in light that turned green when a deployment finished without tears. People started calling Nexatech a player in blog posts that spelled my name correctly and sometimes put it first. On a quiet night with the windows open to a sound that could have been wind or traffic or a future, I wrote an internal note to myself I never sent. Learning to scale is learning to say no to the version of us that loved being small. I read it the next morning and closed the document because there are emails you only ever write to your own spine. We hired an operations lead because we were bad at calendars and worse at saying no. We posted the job and resumes arrived that looked like museum pieces polished and framed and lit from within. Among them was one that would later become a chapter I did not want. But for now it was just an attachment that promised discipline and breadth to a team that had run too hard. For now it was a name I didn't know yet. I kept building. The system learned to distrust coincidences and comfort lies. I taught it to listen to edges, not just centers. We refined the model until it could tell curiosity from malice the way you can tell thunder from a truck if you grew up under a big sky. Clients stopped asking what it was and started asking how fast we could make it multiply. Daniel learned to be photographed without blinking. I learned to wear a blazer without feeling like an imposter. On a Friday near the end of that first truly good year, I walked into the office early and sat alone in the glass room watching the city breathe. The build light glowed green. The coffee machine purred a welcome. I closed my eyes and tried to hear any sound that could be called regret. There wasn't one. Only relief. Only the steady hum of a system that did what it said it would do. If I had known then what I know now, I don't think I would have changed the beginning. It was honest. It taught me discipline and mercy. It taught me where my worth lives when nobody is looking. It taught me to make things that can stand alone in the dark. Later, I would learn different lessons: the cost of charisma, the way a story can erase its author if the room prefers a different narrator. But none of that belonged to the sunrise I watched that morning. That morning belonged to code that behaved and a promise that still fit. That morning belonged to a company with my fingerprints inside its bones and a future that hadn't yet been sold. When the team came in, they found me with a marker in my hand, drawing a small circle on the whiteboard and writing inside it, "Don't forget what this felt like." No one asked me to explain. We were too busy. We were always too busy. And at that stage of the story, busy still felt like love. Success doesn't disappear overnight. It fades grain by grain until you wake up one morning and realize you've been standing in the wrong light for a long time. At first it was subtle, a shift so small it almost felt accidental. Daniel started interrupting me in meetings not with malice, just with that gentle authority he wore like a second skin. "Let me clarify what Rachel means," he'd say, turning toward the board as if I were a junior developer whose thoughts needed translation. The first time it happened, I smiled and let it pass. The second time I finished my sentence anyway, and he smiled back, tight polite, like I'd violated a rule he hadn't yet written down. The new investors loved him. They said he had vision, that he knew how to lead a room. They said my mind was brilliant but too technical, that I should focus on the product and let Daniel handle the narrative. The word narrative hung in the air like a perfume I couldn't wash off. He began scheduling client calls without me. At first it was just logistics, time zones, overlaps. Then it became a habit. My calendar was filled with development reviews while he traveled to conferences collecting applause that used to be ours. I told myself it was fine. That growth meant division. That he was the face, I was the foundation. But foundations crack when they're built on silence. Alyssa joined during that shift. A clean resume, a calm confidence, a kind of brightness that made people listen before she even spoke. She had been brought in to streamline operations to make the chaos sustainable. I was exhausted enough to be grateful. The first time we spoke, it was nearly midnight. The office was empty except for the glow of monitors and the smell of burnt coffee. She leaned against the glass wall, smiling. "You built all this?" she asked. "Most of it," I said. She nodded. "It's beautiful, structured but alive. That's rare." I should have remembered that flattery is a handshake in disguise. But at the time, I believed her. We stayed for another hour talking about data ethics and bias models and the absurdity of venture capital. She laughed at my cynicism and told me she admired women who didn't apologize for intelligence. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. When Daniel introduced her to the board 2 weeks later, he called her indispensable. I clapped like everyone else. The cracks deepened slowly. Daniel began arriving late to our meetings, sometimes not at all. His emails turned transactional, short-clipped and void of warmth. I'd find post-it notes on my desk in Alyssa's handwriting. "Daniel asked for these numbers." Urgent. Always urgent. The team started routing decisions through her. She claimed it was just to save time, but I could feel the shape of the shift. Authority, like water, always finds the lowest resistance. One evening, I stayed late to debug a client module. When I finally shut down the system, I saw through the glass walls that Daniel's office light was still on. I hesitated, then walked closer. Alyssa was inside, sitting across from him. The laughter was quiet, private. Her hand brushed his sleeve. He didn't flinch. I froze for a moment, staring through the glass that reflected everything and revealed nothing. Then I turned away. The next morning, he was sweetness itself. Brought coffee to my desk, complimented a release I'd finished 2 weeks earlier, asked if I was feeling less stressed lately. It wasn't kindness, it was management. People say gaslighting feels like being lost in fog, but for me, it felt like standing under a fluorescent light that never turned off. Constant humming, too bright to see clearly. Daniel started sending emails to the board about my concerns for Rachel's work-life balance. He CC'd me on one of them by mistake. I stared at the words, my hands trembling. Brilliant, but increasingly withdrawn. "I'm worried she's overextending herself." Overextending. A neat way to say I'm paving the road to her exit. One Friday, I walked into a leadership meeting and found my seat had been moved. Not a big thing, just 3 chairs down closer to the end. But it felt deliberate, like the first act of erasure. Daniel smiled from his spot at the head of the table. "Thought you'd be more comfortable near the engineers," he said. Alyssa sat beside him, flipping through her notes, calm and luminous in the morning light. Every time she laughed at one of his remarks, the sound scraped against something raw inside me. I tried to focus on the presentation, but my eyes kept drifting to the reflection on the glass wall, the way Daniel leaned toward her, the way her hair caught the light like a signal I couldn't decode. The word Jasmine drifted through my mind. Not because she wore perfume, but because that's how her presence felt: sweet, invasive, impossible to ignore. A few weeks later, I confronted Daniel at home. "You've been different," I said quietly. He didn't look up from his phone. "We're under pressure, Rachel. You're reading into things." "I'm reading the emails," I replied. "The board ones. The ones where you call me erratic." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I'm trying to protect you. You've been tense, emotional. People notice." It was almost impressive, the precision of his inversion. He made me doubt my own clarity. I felt the familiar heat of humiliation rise to my throat, but forced it down. "You used to believe in me," I said. He met my gaze, then cold and flat. "I still do. Just Not in the same way. He walked past me, leaving the faint trace of cologne and distance. The front door closed softly like the end of a promise. I started staying later at the office again, partly to work, partly to remember who I was before all this. The glow of the monitors was gentler than Daniel's new silence. In that light, my code still spoke honestly. It didn't twist my meaning or question my intent. It just responded. Sometimes when I looked at the dashboards, I'd imagine the data as witness records that could never lie. Somewhere in there, buried under layers of revisions and access logs, was the proof of what I'd built. What I still was. But proof isn't always enough. In the world we'd created, perception was currency, and Daniel was a master banker. One night, as I prepared to leave, Alyssa appeared at my office door. She smiled, holding a folder to her chest. Daniel wanted me to get your sign-off on the resource allocation plan. I took the folder and skimmed it. Half the resources from my R&D team had been redirected to her department. You're expanding fast, I said, looking up. Trying to, she replied softly. We're streamlining redundancies. I caught her gaze and held it. Am I one of those redundancies? Her expression didn't change. Of course not, Rachel. You're the foundation of everything here. The same words Daniel had once said to me. The same tone. When she left, the scent of toner and electric dust filled the air, but the space felt colder. I sat back staring at the folder. The signature line was blank. I picked up my pen, but my hand hovered. Then I placed the pen down slowly and deliberately. Not yet, I thought. Not on their terms. The building's lights dimmed to their after-hours glow, and my reflection looked back at me from the glass, faint, uncertain, but still there. For the first time in months, I felt something resembling clarity. They could shift chairs, rewrite titles, and control the narrative. But they couldn't own the truth. And truth, once written into a system, always leaves a trace. It happened on an evening that began like any other quiet office, the hum of servers settling into their nocturnal rhythm. The kind of night that used to mean focus. Now it just meant distance. I stayed late to review a client audit, a habit I hadn't shaken even after being quietly sidelined. The office had that hollow sound buildings get when everyone's gone home, my footsteps echoing down the corridor, the vending machine humming like a low memory. Alyssa's door was open. At first, I thought she'd just forgotten to shut down her laptop. The screen glowed faintly in the dim light, illuminating the glass desk, the untouched coffee, the delicate handwriting on a notepad, Q1 strategic planning. I almost turned away, but then a small notification pulsed in the corner of the screen. Inbox 2. New subject, cabin weekend. I froze. For a moment I told myself to leave, to be professional, to rise above it. But curiosity and instinct, those two conspirators that had built my entire career, leaned forward before reason could pull me back. I stepped closer. The cursor blinked, patient and relentless, as if daring me. I touched the trackpad and the window bloomed open. It wasn't what I expected, not love letters, not even apologies wrapped in strategy. It was logistics, reservations, a scanned itinerary for a cabin 2 hours from the city, 3 nights, 2 guests. And then beneath it, the second email thread, subject reorganization plan phase 2. I clicked. My name was everywhere. Highlighted, annotated, dissected. Rachel's transition timeline. Board presentation removes technical lead attribution. Q1 merge Rachel's department with operations under Alyssa's oversight. At the bottom, Daniel's words, she'll resist. Gaslight her gently. Document everything. The word made my throat close. I took a breath that didn't reach my lungs. My hands shook as I pressed print screen, capturing each thread, every name, every timestamp. 20 screenshots, maybe more. I lost count halfway through. Not because I doubted myself. Because paper, no matter how digital the world becomes, is the only friend that shows up in court. When I finally leaned back, the silence in the room had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It had edges. I looked around at the neat rows of binders, the glass awards gleaming in their cabinet, The framed photos of Daniel and Alyssa at conferences, our conferences once. My reflection appeared in the dark window behind them, faint and overlaid on their smiles. For a strange moment, I looked like the ghost haunting my own success. I backed away, leaving her desk exactly as I found it. As I walked out, the lights flickered from the motion sensors, briefly illuminating the Nexatech logo on the wall. It used to fill me with pride. Tonight, it felt like a warning label. At home, I spread the screenshots across my desk like evidence from a crime scene. The glow from my laptop bathed the papers in a blue wash, the cursor pulsing like a heartbeat. I opened one of the images again, zooming in on Daniel's phrasing. Gaslight her gently. It wasn't even anger I felt, just a still, nauseating kind of disbelief. The sentence was so ordinary, so procedural, it might have been about a product release. They'd turned my erasure into a line item. I closed my eyes and thought back to the first year, to that rain-soaked courthouse, and his whispered promise. 50-50 forever. The words echoed once hollow and then dissolved into static. The next morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else. My reflection followed me in the glass doors, steady, expressionless. I went straight to my workstation and began copying data securely, quietly. Source control logs, design documents, and system models with my digital signature embedded deep in the metadata. Not to destroy, not to steal, just to prove. When the first few employees trickled in, they greeted me as if nothing had changed. Maybe for them, nothing had. Maybe this kind of betrayal is only visible from the inside out. I worked through the morning pretending to debug while line by line I reclaimed what was mine. Around noon, Daniel appeared in my doorway, his smile bright and hollow. "Haven't seen much of you lately," he said. "Everything okay?" I turned my chair slightly. "You tell me." He tilted his head, the practiced empathy flickering on. "You seem distant." "Do I?" I asked. "That's funny. You seem busy." Cabin weekends, reorganizations, gentle gaslighting takes a lot of coordination, doesn't it? The color drained from his face before he could stop it. A beat later, he recovered, smiling again. "You're overreacting. You shouldn't be going through other people's emails. Maybe they shouldn't be writing about mine." His jaw flexed. "You're tired, Rachel. You've been working too much. Let's take a step back." I stood, closing the laptop with a soft click. "You should, Daniel, before you trip over something you can't delete." I brushed past him, feeling his hand hover for a moment near my arm but never touch. He wasn't brave enough for that anymore. In the bathroom mirror, I washed my hands and watched the water swirl down the drain, gray from the ink I hadn't realized had rubbed off the printed screenshots. My reflection stared back, older, sharper, untamed. I whispered to it, "They think I'm losing control." But I wasn't losing it. I was reclaiming it. That night I drove until the city thinned into forest. The highway lights flickered past like frames from an old film. Somewhere between exits, I pulled over and parked near a rest stop, the hum of distant traffic filling the silence. I opened my laptop again, scrolling through the screenshots one last time. Proof precise and undeniable. But I knew it wasn't enough to win. It was only enough to start. So I began to plan. If they wanted to take my company, they could try. But I would make sure the code they claimed ownership of would always tell the truth about who had built it. Not through revenge, through architecture. Truth doesn't shout, it endures. When I returned home, the city was asleep. My apartment felt smaller somehow, but calmer. I placed the printed screenshots in a fireproof folder and locked it away. Then I opened a blank document and wrote 3 words at the top: Phase 1, containment. I wasn't sure what Phase 2 would be yet, but I knew one thing: they had underestimated me, and I was done underestimating myself. There's a particular kind of silence that follows manipulation. It isn't peaceful, it hums like a fluorescent light left on too long. That was my life for the next few months. Every conversation with Daniel or Alyssa left a residue. A pause too long, a smile too smooth, compliments that came with a hook. "Rachel, you've been doing too much. Maybe you should delegate more. Let others lead. Don't take things so personally. Each phrase polished down my confidence one grain at a time. I began doubting the order of events, replaying exchanges to see if maybe they were right. Maybe I had overreacted. It was like living in a house where the furniture moved half an inch every night, until one morning you tripped over your own certainty. I stopped going out. I stopped answering calls from friends who still thought we were the golden couple of Seattle tech. At work, my badge still opened doors, but fewer people looked up when I walked through them. Sometimes I'd catch the developers pausing mid-conversation when I entered the room. One day, I overheard a whisper near the kitchenette. "She's not the same," someone said. "Daniel says she's struggling." I wanted to shout that the only thing I was struggling with was his lies. But shouting makes you sound crazy, and crazy was the label they were grooming for me. So I stayed quiet. And in that quiet, I started listening differently. It was my therapist, not a friend, who gave me language for what was happening. Her office smelled faintly of eucalyptus and distant rain. She had that calm, deliberate way of speaking that made you feel like she was rearranging the air. "You're describing a pattern of gaslighting," she said after our third session. The word hung there between us. I'd heard it before, but never as a diagnosis. "Gaslighting isn't always shouting," she continued. "Sometimes it's strategic empathy. They make you doubt the shape of your own memory." I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "He tells people I'm unstable. I found proof. But if I show it, I become exactly what he says. I am paranoid vindictive." She tilted her head. "So you keep the proof quiet, and they keep control loud." The truth of it was both simple and unbearable. She gestured toward the mirror on the far wall. "Look at yourself, Rachel. You're fighting for evidence when what you really need is boundaries. I don't even know what those look like anymore." She smiled softly. "They look like you walking out of a room the minute someone starts rewriting your story." That night, I stood in front of my own mirror for a long time. My reflection looked thinner, sharper, the skin under my eyes bruised from sleeplessness. The fluorescent bathroom light flickered slightly, echoing that same hum I'd felt for weeks. The mirror became a motif of reckoning after that. Every morning before work, I'd face it and tell myself one sentence: "You remember correctly." It sounds small, but it anchored me more than caffeine or logic ever could. Daniel noticed the change. "You've been quiet lately," he said one morning as we crossed paths in the office lobby. His voice was gentle, the kind of tone you'd use for someone fragile. "Just busy," I replied. He smiled. "Good. Focus helps." Alyssa was behind him, phone in hand, her gaze skimming over me like I was already fading from view. For the first time, I didn't look away. Her expression faltered just slightly. That was the first victory. Small, silent, but real. Weeks passed. The company grew noisier around me, but my role shrank to whispers and forwarded emails. I watched as Daniel and Alyssa hosted meetings I'd designed, pitching ideas that began with my name but ended with theirs. I stopped trying to reclaim credit. That battle was too public, too easy to lose. Instead, I started building something quieter. I documented everything, not for revenge, not yet, but for protection. Every access change, every authorization shift, every system log that didn't add up. I'd learned from therapy that truth has a rhythm, and lies always stumble if you let them play long enough. Each night I'd stay behind after everyone left. The office emptied, the hum of servers rising as the city lights blinked alive outside the glass. I'd sit at my desk, open the codebase, and trace every alteration Alyssa had made. Tiny inconsistencies, lines duplicated but out of sync. It was like listening to an orchestra where one instrument kept playing half a beat off. That was when I started thinking of it as a symphony, the Gaslight Symphony, where every false note revealed the composer. One evening, while reviewing the audit system, I found something that made my breath hitch. A hidden script embedded deep in the architecture, a function labeled auth-check override. It was designed to bypass my encryption layers and the access logs, Daniel's credentials. I stared at the screen until the lines of code blurred. They weren't just erasing me publicly, they were erasing me technically, rewriting the DNA of the company I'd built. The irony almost made me laugh. A cybersecurity firm is deleting its own creator. I copied the code into a secure folder, timestamped it, and whispered to the empty room, "Thank you for the confession." At home, I sat in the dark with a glass of water, not wine. I didn't want the haze. The glow of the city outside flickered against the blinds like Morse code spelling out the obvious: it was time. Therapy had taught me to separate emotion from response. They wanted me to react. I would be methodical. I reopened my laptop and began a new document, this one titled The Mirror Project. It wasn't an official name, just a placeholder. My idea was simple: an internal system that would quietly copy, timestamp, and verify every change made within Nexitech's architecture, like a black box in an airplane, impossible to tamper with. The perfect answer to gaslighting wasn't shouting the truth. It was making the truth undeniable. Line by line, I started sketching how it would work. Invisible, integrated self-healing. A ghost that would live inside the company's walls, recording every falsehood in perfect mechanical memory. As the cursor blinked, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. My hands were steady. My breath is even. The fear that had defined me for months was gone, replaced by something colder, more efficient. Not rage, precision. By dawn, I closed the document and looked around the apartment, the same space where Daniel and I had once eaten noodles over early prototypes. It was quiet now, stripped of illusion. I glanced at the mirror on the wall as the first light of morning slid across its surface. My reflection looked back, not strong yet, but awake. "This isn't revenge," I whispered to her. "This is preservation." And for the first time, I believed it. There's a kind of clarity that comes after despair. It doesn't arrive like light, it seeps in like dawn, inch by inch, until you realize you're not surviving anymore. You're building. That's where I was when I began the hidden code. By day, I was still the polite, diminished version of myself, the one Daniel and Alyssa had curated. I nodded in meetings, took notes no one would read, and stayed quiet when credit shifted elsewhere. I had learned the art of invisibility, and like any skill, it became a tool. By night, I became myself again. The project started in pieces, fragments of logic scattered across the architecture I'd designed years ago. Nexitech's backbone still bore my fingerprints no matter how many times they'd tried to rename or restructure it. Every system remembers its creator if you know where to look. I wrote the first sequence late one Thursday, the office long empty. Rain pressed against the windows in thin, rhythmic sheets, and the only light came from my monitor painting my reflection in blue. The goal wasn't to destroy. I didn't want chaos. I wanted truth. So the system I built wasn't a virus. It was a mirror, a network within a network hidden in the folds of code they thought they owned. It would copy every transaction, every internal edit, every change to the company's source. It would preserve metadata that couldn't be altered, timestamps that couldn't be forged, and access trails that couldn't be scrubbed. And if someone tried to tamper with it, the system wouldn't fight back. It would simply remember. Every lie they inserted into the logs, every falsified report to investors, every unauthorized removal of my name, it would all be there, frozen in digital amber. I called it Echo Encrypted Code for Historical Oversight. Simple, precise. The code lived in silence, hidden beneath harmless subroutines with dull names like temp scheduler and log sync task. To anyone looking, it was just another maintenance utility. The first version took 2 weeks. I installed it slowly, carefully weaving it between system updates and bug patches. I knew Daniel barely glanced at the technical commits anymore. Alyssa wouldn't recognize the pattern even if she did. Their arrogance was my camouflage. Each night, I'd stay until the cleaning staff arrived. I'd wave, smile, pretend to be exhausted but loyal. And as soon as the building lights dimmed, I'd open the terminal again. It was meticulous work, a balance between exposure and concealment. I had to ensure no alerts would fire, no logs would show unexpected activity. Every line had to look like it belonged there, invisible in plain sight. The first successful test happened at 2:13 a.m. A pop-up flashed for half a second before vanishing. I checked the archive, a perfect replica of a financial report Alyssa had adjusted earlier that day, right down to the hidden metadata showing who'd accessed it and when. Echo had recorded everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, until the reflection blurred. I felt no triumph, just the quiet steadiness of inevitability. During the day, Daniel kept performing concern. "You've been working late again," he said one morning, his tone casual, his smile cautious. I shrugged. Old habits. He studied me for a beat longer than necessary, then nodded. "We're almost there, Rachel. After the next round, we can both rest." "Rest," I repeated. "Sure." His hand brushed my shoulder in a way that felt rehearsed. I didn't flinch, but the moment he left, I scrubbed the contact from my sleeve. Alyssa followed shortly after, carrying a folder she didn't need. "Just checking in," she said. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said, meeting her eyes. "Just making sure the systems remember everything they're supposed to." She smiled, missing the meaning entirely. "Good. We can't afford surprises." "No," I said. "We can't." By the second month, Echo had evolved. It wasn't just recording, it was analyzing. When inconsistencies appeared in the internal documents, it flagged them automatically. Words like unauthorized, inconsistent, and tampered began surfacing in quiet system notes that no one but me could see. If the company were a body, Echo had become its conscience. One night, as I reviewed the logs, a line appeared that made my breath still. "Unauthorized modification detected, origin admin. D. Marshall." Daniel again. Editing quarterly security reports to remove audit discrepancies. I traced the change, watching it cascade across the database like a shadow. Then, with one command, I preserved it immutable, permanent. He thought he was rewriting history. In truth, he was signing his confession. Sleep became optional. The world outside blurred into the periphery, the sound of sirens, the color of sunrise, the feel of weekends. Everything folded into the rhythm of code and silence. Sometimes I'd forget to eat. The cleaning crew would find me at dawn, still typing, eyes fixed on the scrolling console. They probably thought I was obsessive. Maybe I was. But obsession is what you call justice when no one else believes you. At home, I stopped locking the door. What could they take that they hadn't already stolen? My sense of safety was gone, but purpose filled the space it left. Echo grew stronger. I layered redundancy into it, storing fragments across cloud servers that Daniel didn't control. Every key was encrypted under a different alias, each alias tied to a timestamp only I could trace. If they ever removed me, the system would still breathe. If they tried to delete me, it would speak. I tested it once, impersonating Daniel's credentials, triggering a false deletion. The next morning, the network silently restored the missing files and appended a single message to the log integrity check: complete source restored. I sat there for a long time, reading that line over and over, the words blurring into a single feeling: relief. Not victory yet, but something close. A few weeks later, the board announced a strategic restructuring. My department was officially merged under Alyssa's management. I didn't protest. It was the move I had expected, the one that would complete the trap. They thought I'd been cut out. They didn't realize I'd already built myself into the walls. That night, as I packed my things, I ran one final diagnostic. Every marker, every archive, every signature check intact. The lights overhead buzzed softly, dimming on their nightly timer. In their faint glow, the reflection in my monitor caught my face, tired, lined with sleeplessness, but unbroken. I whispered to it, "You did well." And for the first time in months, I meant it. When I stepped outside, the city air felt cold and clean. I looked back at Nexatech's glass tower, its mirrored surface reflecting the faint gold of the streetlights. They believed they had erased me from the narrative. What they didn't know was that I had become the narrative. The night I learned the truth was the kind of quiet that feels wrong. It was mid-December, the office half empty, the city already glowing with Christmas lights. From my window, the neon reflection of a coffee shop flickered against the glass like a heartbeat. I should have gone home hours earlier, but something in me resisted the idea of sleep. At 10:47 p.m., I heard voices down the hall. Daniel's first, then Alyssa's low but tense. I froze. They were in the small conference room, the one with the frosted glass walls. The blinds were half drawn, but light spilled through the gaps, washing over the floor like water. I moved closer. After New Year's, Daniel said, we make it official. The board already believes she's unstable. Once she's out, we'll reassign her shares and rebrand before the next quarter's report. Alyssa's tone was sharp but calm. You're sure the documentation's airtight? We can't afford loose ends. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She's exhausted. And once HR handles the termination, the divorce can follow. Quietly. The divorce. He said it like it was an item on a checklist. I stood there in the dark hallway, my hand gripping the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. The last of my naive hope cracked and fell away like glass under pressure. When their voices faded, I didn't cry. I just went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. The decision wasn't made out of fury, it was precision. Echo had been designed to remember. Now it needed a trigger. Something small, unnoticeable, but absolute. The trigger would be time. I created a sequence, one line of logic buried deep inside the maintenance scheduler, tied to the company's internal calendar. It would activate the moment my account was officially disabled. They wanted to erase me from Nexatech. The moment they did, Echo would make sure the truth couldn't be erased with me. The next day, Daniel came into my office holding a cup of coffee, his peace offering. You've been working too hard, he said gently. After the holidays, maybe you should take some time off. Get perspective. Perspective. Yeah, he said, smiling in that careful managerial way he'd perfected. Sometimes stepping back helps us see what matters. I looked at the coffee cup, at the tiny lipstick stain on the rim that wasn't mine. You're right, I said. It does. He didn't notice the tremor in my voice, or maybe he mistook it for fatigue. Either way, it didn't matter. He left satisfied, and I added his visit to my notes. Daniel. Preparing psychological groundwork. Each manipulation had become data. Each lie was another timestamp for Echo to log. That week I stopped correcting people in meetings. When someone misquoted me, I smiled. When Alyssa claimed credit for the new integration feature, I nodded. Let them build their version of reality. I was done fighting perception. I was writing history. A few nights later, I found something that made everything worse and better. I was combing through internal invoices, pretending to audit vendor payments, when I found a trail that didn't belong. 3 companies, Integrasys, North Shore Consulting, and Blue Cove Data Partners, each listed as strategic contractors. But their addresses led to P.O. boxes and empty shells. The payment approvals bore Daniel's signature. The amounts weren't massive at first, tens of thousands, but when I added them up over a year, they crossed 7 figures. They weren't just stealing from me. They were stealing from everyone. I created a secure folder labeled Project Frostline and uploaded every file, every signature, every falsified document. Then I encrypted it 3 times, one key for the cloud, one on a physical drive I kept in my home safe, and one embedded in Echo itself. If Nexatech burned, Frostline would rise from the ashes. The holidays came and went in a blur of artificial cheer. At the office Christmas party, Daniel and Alyssa performed their roles perfectly, the charming CEO and the brilliant COO. The champagne sparkled, the laughter echoed, and I smiled through it all, the perfect ghost. I remember Alyssa leaning close at the bar, her voice dripping with false warmth. You've done such amazing work this year, Rachel. I don't think Daniel could have done any of it without you. I met her gaze. No, I said softly. He couldn't have. She thought it was gratitude. She didn't see the blade under the words. On New Year's Eve, I stayed late again. Seattle's skyline shimmered with fireworks, and from the 22nd floor, the colors reflected in every pane of glass. The office was silent except for the faint hum of servers in the distance, the pulse of the company. That night, I wrote the final segment of Echo's code. It wasn't destruction, it was exposure. If they cut me off, Echo would begin cross-verifying every internal file, checking it against the immutable records I'd stored. Every falsified report, every embezzlement trail, every false signature would surface. The system would label them all the same way: unauthorized modification detected. No one could stop it once it began. I sat there as the clock struck midnight, the fireworks flashing across the skyline. Somewhere people were kissing, making resolutions, and clinking glasses to a new year. I was making a promise, too. The next morning, the first workday of January, I walked into the office early. The air felt sharp electric. My desk was clean, my personal items already boxed. HR had been efficient. Daniel looked surprised when he saw me. "You're in early." "I wanted to make sure everything's ready for the transition," I said evenly. "You'll need access to all system logs and the integration server." "That's thoughtful of you," he said. "We appreciate your cooperation." Alyssa appeared in the doorway holding a sleek manila folder. "We'll meet with the board tomorrow to finalize. It's almost over." "Almost over." I smiled at her. "You have no idea how right you are." Chapesi. That evening, I went home, brewed coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. The light from the laptop screen pooled across my face as I reviewed the code one last time. It was all there: Frostline Echo, the triggers, the fail-safes. At 9:43 p.m., I opened the scheduler and entered one final command. Execution condition: R disable account user, Rachel Donovan. When my account was deleted, the truth would surface. Not as an explosion, but as an unveiling, quiet, undeniable, irreversible. The cursor blinked once, waiting for confirmation. I pressed enter. The screen displayed a single line: timer set 2 days. 10 days until everything they'd built on deceit began to unravel. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the steady rhythm of my heart. This wasn't revenge. It was in equilibrium. For the first time in months, I slept. The morning of my termination was bright and strangely quiet. The city outside my window gleamed after rain, every surface silvered with light. I made coffee, dressed in the same charcoal suit I'd worn for our first investor pitch 8 years ago, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't tremble. There was no trace of panic. Only stillness, the kind that arrives when the storm's already passed inside you. I reached for the laptop Daniel thought was nothing more than nostalgia. The old silver one with a dent near the corner and fading keys. It looked harmless, obsolete even. But it was the heartbeat of everything they'd stolen from me. The trigger was already embedded deep within, waiting for its moment. 10 days. When I arrived at the Nexatech headquarters, I could feel the performance already in motion. Everyone avoided eye contact. HR was unusually busy for a Monday morning. The boardroom doors were open, the long table, polished glasses of water already set out. Alyssa stood by the window, her posture immaculate, her expression composed into corporate empathy. Daniel was at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, playing the role of the weary leader doing what must be done. He didn't look up when I entered. "Rachel," he said in that low managerial tone, the one he used when he wanted to sound merciful. "Let's make this quick." I didn't sit. "Please." He gestured toward the empty chair across from him, as if we were equals negotiating something civil. "Have a seat." I looked at the chair, then back at him. "I'll stand." Something flickered in his eyes. Irritation. Maybe surprise. Alyssa smiled, stepping forward with a folder. "This is the official record of your performance review and the subsequent recommendation for termination. I've attached the documentation for your severance and the NDA." The words performance review caught me like a spark. I hadn't been reviewed in 6 years. I was the one who'd written the review process. Daniel cleared his throat. The board has expressed concern over your inability to collaborate effectively. There have been reports of erratic behavior, missed meetings, and hostile exchanges with colleagues. I met his gaze. Reports filed by whom? He hesitated. Those details are confidential. Convenient, I said softly. Rachel Alyssa said, her voice soothing and falsely sympathetic. We know how much you've given to this company, but sometimes founders grow apart from the direction of the organization. We just want this transition to be respectful. Respectful. The word tasted metallic. I looked at the papers in her hand but didn't take them. Is that why you've been forwarding my access logs to Daniel every week? Her eyes widened slightly. Excuse me, the system records everything, Alyssa, including your login credentials, including the times you accessed restricted folders to alter timestamps on financial reports. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What? Her mask faltered for just a moment before she regained composure. She's making things up again. This is exactly what we've been concerned about. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rachel, this is exactly the kind of behavior that confirms our decision. You're paranoid. You've been overworked for too long. It's time to step back. I took a slow breath, letting his words settle like sediment in still water. You're right about one thing. It's time. I reached into my bag and pulled out my old laptop, the one they thought I kept for sentimental reasons. Its surface caught the light, dull but deliberate. I placed it on the table between us. What's that? Daniel asked. History, I said. You can keep it. Call it a parting gift. Alyssa frowned. What kind of game are you playing? No game. Just housekeeping. Behind me, the HR director shifted awkwardly, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. The air in the room thickened. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the ceiling vents, the faint tick of Daniel's watch. He pushed the folder toward me. Sign it, Rachel. Walk away with dignity. You'll still retain your equity, and we can put this behind us. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who once stayed up with me on the floor of our first apartment brainstorming code architecture and dreaming about changing the world. That man was long gone, replaced by someone who thought power was ownership. I built this company with you, I said quietly. Line by line. I built every system you use, every process you take credit for. You can fire me, you can write your stories, but you can't erase me. Watch me, he said. I smiled. I already have. Alyssa stepped closer, her patience thinning. You're wasting everyone's time. You'll be escorted out if you don't comply. Then escort me. Daniel sighed, signaling toward the door. Two security officers appeared, Tony and Mark, both of whom had known me for years. Their eyes were downcast. I'll go, I said. No need to make a scene. I reached for the folder, glanced at the signature line, then slid it back toward Daniel. You forgot a clause, I said. He frowned. What clause? The one that says truth eventually finds its way home. His expression hardened. Enough, Rachel. I closed my laptop and lifted it by the edge. I think we're done here. I turned toward the door, and as I did, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A single vibration. I didn't need to check it. I already knew what it was. Echo's timer had entered its final phase. I walked through the hall, every step echoing like a heartbeat. The employees who passed me didn't make eye contact. The woman who'd once been their leader now looked like a ghost walking through her own creation. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside and turned back one last time. Through the glass walls, I could see Daniel standing at the head of the boardroom table, Alyssa whispering something into his ear, her face pale. He looked uneasy now, glancing at the laptop I'd left behind. The elevator doors closed, sealing them inside their illusion of control. As the car descended, I let out a slow breath. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Just relieved that the performance was over. Downstairs, Tony waited near the lobby doors, avoiding my gaze. You okay, Rachel? He asked quietly. I'm fine, I said. It's just the end of a chapter. He hesitated, then said, You didn't deserve this. Maybe not, I replied. But they did. Outside, the January air was cold enough to bite. I stood on the curb for a long moment watching my breath vanish in the winter air. Above the Nexatech logo gleamed across the building's mirrored facade, confident and untouchable. I opened my phone. The countdown on the encrypted screen displayed a single-line integrity sequence initiating. Verification in progress. Estimated time to completion 48 hours. Not 10 minutes. Not chaos. Just truth assembling itself line by line, ready to be seen. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked away. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's a setup. 48 hours. That was the window I'd given the truth. I didn't expect fireworks or sirens. I designed it to be quite the kind of collapse that looks at first like a coincidence. The morning after my exit, I woke up before dawn. I made coffee, sat by the window, and opened the encrypted dashboard on my laptop. The progress bar blinked faintly. Integrity verification 12% complete. No alarms, no breaches. Just the soft, methodical unveiling of everything they'd tried to bury. Outside, the city stretched beneath gray Seattle clouds. Office lights flickered on one by one as people began their day. Somewhere across the skyline, Daniel would be standing in the same boardroom, still believing he'd won. He didn't know the code he'd inherited wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. By mid-morning, the first cracks appeared. Sarah, one of the senior engineers, texted me from an unknown number. "Hey, are you seeing the reports? Something weird's happening in the audit logs. Files are showing unauthorized modification flags, but we can't trace why." I typed back only 2 words, "Keep watching." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. At Nexatech headquarters, I imagined the hum building, first confusion, then panic. The same people who'd once whispered about my instability were now whispering about Daniel's leadership. When system checks began failing, the narrative flipped overnight. Emails leaked later would show the sequence clearly. 8:17 a.m. Alyssa flagged the first anomaly. 9:02 a.m. Daniel ordered a lockdown. 9:18 a.m. Internal integrity audit triggered automatically by Echo's third layer. The same board that had voted to terminate me now watched a cascade of alerts flood their screens, each one stamped with the same phrase: unauthorized edit detected. Origin administrative account. The system was calling out their own fraud, one falsified entry at a time. At noon, I sat at a cafe a few blocks away, nursing black coffee as if it were champagne. From where I sat, I could see the glass facade of Nexatech's tower reflecting the colorless sky. The people inside were ants in motion, tiny silhouettes darting between floors. The first news headline popped up on my phone around 12:47. Breaking: Nexatech faces internal audit crisis. CEO cancels media appearance. The article was cautious at first. Potential data integrity issues, temporary disruption, technical anomaly. But I knew how these stories evolved. Truth spreads like water through cracks. By evening, 2 more reports had surfaced, this time from financial media outlets. Investors wanted answers. Regulators wanted explanations. I didn't have to lift a finger. My silence was louder than any statement. That night, Daniel called. I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed was almost clinical at first, measured, rehearsed. "Rachel, we need to talk. Something's happening with the system. If this is you, you need to stop it before it goes too far. Think about the company. Think about the people who depend on it." I deleted the message. 2 hours later, another came through. "Rachel, please. The system's rewriting itself. It's publishing flagged entries directly to the external audit queue. The board's in chaos. They're saying we might have to disclose. I need you." I listened to that one twice. Not for what he said, but for what he didn't. The arrogance was gone. The performance had cracked. By the second day, Nexatech's internal communications had leaked to the press. A local tech blog broke the story: whistleblower code exposes fraudulent records at cybersecurity giant. They didn't name me. Not yet. But every insider knew who had the skill and the motive. That afternoon, the official press conference aired live. I didn't plan to watch, but curiosity won. Daniel stood behind the podium looking smaller than I remembered. The man who used to command rooms with easy confidence now looked like a shadow of himself, his tie crooked, his voice trembling around words he couldn't control. "We experienced an internal systems malfunction during a recent update," he said. "Our top engineers are investigating, and we're cooperating fully with auditors." A reporter cut in. "Is it true that the logs show deliberate tampering of financial documents?" His throat worked. "I can't comment on that at this time." Another voice. "Is it true the system attributes the edits to your administrative account?" The silence that followed was almost merciful. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to see more. By the third morning, the board suspended Daniel pending investigation. Alyssa resigned for personal reasons. Nexatech's stock dropped 42% in a single day. The press swarmed the building. News vans lined the street. Headlines shifted tone from confusion to accusation, from malfunction to misconduct. The company that built its name on integrity had been undone by the one thing it underestimated: transparency. That evening, I went for a walk. The streets were slick with rain traffic lights bleeding red across puddles. I passed the Nexatech Tower on my way home. Its logo glowed faintly in the mist, like something trying to stay relevant. A small crowd gathered near the entrance, reporters, investors, and employees clutching boxes. Among them, I saw Sarah. She caught my eye but didn't speak. She just nodded once, a quiet salute. I nodded back and kept walking. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my encrypted drive. Frostline had done its job. Every falsified report was archived, every forged signature preserved. The data had already been delivered anonymously to the State Financial Oversight Bureau. Daniel's downfall wasn't a fire. It was erosion. Line by line, truth wore him away. I opened the last message he ever sent. "Rachel, I know it's you. You win. I hope it was worth it." I typed a reply, but I didn't send it. Some silences are stronger than words. 2 weeks later, Nexatech released its official statement. Following an extensive internal review, Nexatech's board of directors has accepted the resignations of CEO Daniel Marshall and COO Alyssa Trent. The company acknowledges irregularities in financial documentation and is cooperating fully with regulators. No mention of me. Of course not. I'd been erased too thoroughly for that. But every line of that statement was a confession. The next day, I received a message from Sarah. "They're offering you your shares back. Board wants to make amends." I smiled, typing my answer carefully. They can keep them. I already own what matters. I closed my laptop, sat back, and listened to the rain against the glass. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The reckoning wasn't destruction. It was balance restored. That night, I dreamed of the old apartment again. The one where Daniel and I once sat, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and half-written code. Only this time, the room was empty. No laptops, no chaos, just light. When I woke, the feeling lingered, not victory, not bitterness, just peace. Truth had taken its time, but it had arrived exactly when it was meant to. 6 weeks after the fall of Nexatech, the rain finally stopped. Seattle mornings had always been gray, but that day, light spilled through my kitchen window like it had been waiting for permission. The silence in my apartment no longer felt heavy, it felt earned. I poured coffee and sat by the same window where I'd once written the first lines of Echo. The city looked different now. Maybe it was me who'd changed. The sound of construction cranes echoed from downtown. Progress was already rewriting the skyline. That was fine. I understood rebuilding. On the table sat a thick envelope from Nexatech's board, unopened. They had offered me a settlement shares, reinstated a formal apology, a statement drafted by their lawyers calling me a valued former contributor. The language was polished, distant, and empty. I didn't open it. The world had already seen what mattered. 3 days after the collapse, my inbox had filled with messages from companies across the industry. Tech firms, financial groups, and even competitors who'd once ignored my name. They all wanted to meet the woman who'd built a system capable of detecting its own corruption. At first, I ignored them. I didn't want another boardroom, another smiling set of faces waiting to rewrite my story. I wasn't ready to be anyone's symbol. But then came the message from a private cybersecurity firm based in Vancouver. We read your code before it was taken down. We understand what you were trying to do. Would you consider building something new this time on your terms? On my terms. That line stayed with me. By February, I'd rented a small office overlooking Elliott Bay. Bare walls, one desk, two monitors, a coffee machine that hissed like an old friend. I named the company Sentinel Code. It wasn't flashy. No launch party, no investor PR, no promises of revolution. Just quiet integrity, a space for honest systems. I hired 3 engineers I trusted completely, people who'd seen what Nexatech had become and walked away. Sarah was one of them. When she arrived, she didn't say much. She just unpacked her laptop, looked around, and smiled. "It feels clean in here," she said. "That's the idea," I replied. We built slowly. Every line of code we wrote was peer-reviewed, twice verified, time-stamped, and archived. Transparency wasn't a feature anymore. It was the foundation. We didn't chase big contracts. We helped small hospitals secure patient data, nonprofits protect donors, family-owned businesses defend their systems from ransomware. Ordinary people who just needed someone to guard what mattered. Each project was a thread woven into something bigger, a network of trust that didn't rely on power or hierarchy, just honesty. Every so often, a journalist would reach out wanting the inside story, the fall of Nexatech through the eyes of the woman who saw it coming. I declined them all. The story wasn't about me, and I didn't need to relive it for headlines. The lesson was already public: if you build an empire on lies, you will eventually drown in the proof. One afternoon, months later, I received an unexpected email. From Daniel Marshall, subject closure. The message was short. "I've taken a teaching job in Ohio. Cybersecurity ethics. Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it? I'm sorry for everything." I don't expect a reply. I read it twice, then deleted it. Not out of anger, but because the words didn't belong in my life anymore. Forgiveness, I realize, doesn't always require a witness. Sometimes it's just the decision to stop carrying someone else's weight. By spring, Sentinel Code had grown. Not large, just steady. Our clients began referring others. Word spread about our transparency system, which we quietly named Echolight, a distant descendant of the original Echo. It didn't hide in code or wait for betrayal. It displayed everything openly. Every access, every change, every hand that touched a file. It made deception impossible by design. When one of my new engineers asked where the idea came from, I smiled and said experience. One morning, Sarah walked into my office holding a copy of Tech West Weekly. Nexatech had resurfaced in the news. "They're selling the last of the company's assets," she said. "Someone's trying to rebrand it under a different name." I took the magazine and scanned the headline. "Former cybersecurity giant acquired by global firm. Rebuilding after scandal." Beneath the article was a photo of the old building, its logo removed, scaffolding lining the walls. Workers were stripping it down to its skeleton. "It looks smaller now," Sarah murmured. "It always was," I said. She smiled. "You ever think about buying it back?" I shook my head. "No. Some ruins should stay where they fell." That evening I stayed late at the office. The city outside glowed amber under the setting sun, the water shimmering like glass. I closed my laptop and stood by the window. From here I could see both the past and the future, the bay where I used to walk after sleepless nights, the towers that had once cast shadows over me, and the faint reflection of myself in the glass. For a long time, I thought power was about control, about building something so perfect it couldn't be taken away. But real power, I realized, was knowing you could rebuild from nothing and still remain whole. I reached for the old laptop on the shelf behind me, the same one Daniel once called worthless. Its surface was scratched, its hinge slightly loose, but when I opened it, the screen flickered to life like an old memory that refused to fade. Inside, the final message from Echo still waited, the one it displayed after completing its cycle months ago: integrity verified. Source restored. I ran my hand over the keys, the warmth of the machine faint against my palm. That laptop had been my first battlefield, my proof, my mirror. Now it was something gentler, an artifact of survival. I set it on the windowsill and let the sunlight fall across it. Somewhere in the city below, a billboard flickered with Nexatech's replacement logo. I didn't feel anger or pride, just distance. I whispered to the fading light, not for anyone else but myself. Never underestimate the woman who built your kingdom, because she knows exactly how to bring it down, and more importantly, how to build something better from its ashes. That night, the rain returned softly, tapping against the glass in a rhythm I knew well. I left the window open, letting the air in. The scent of sea salt concrete and possibility filled the room. I wasn't erasing the past anymore. I was living beyond it. The monitor dimmed. The office lights clicked off one by one. Seattle slept, but Sentinel code hummed quietly through the night, protecting, recording, remembering. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.